Give the eyes. But we've got to move on. We've got to move on. We've got a brilliant panel happening now in this room. The topic is discussing best practice to promote responsible and trustworthy Gen AI and LLMs. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome your moderator to the stage. He's going to introduce this panel. So please give a big hand for Philip Dawson, Head of AI Policy at Armilla AI. Come on, Philip.
Good afternoon. So there's a few of you who have stuck around for the full program. Thanks for staying here, for being with us. This is another important topic. Has been for a while, but certainly the last 18 months, it seems like it keeps picking up steam too. So I'm really thrilled to be here and to have a conversation with 4 people who have a lot of expertise and have been thinking about this topic from a range of different perspectives. And I think we're going to have a very rich discussion, and we'll look forward to your questions at the end. So the title of the panel discussion is Best Practices in Promoting Responsible and Trustworthy Gen AI and LLMs, and you could probably put in some other words instead of responsible or trustworthy. And we used to talk more about maybe ethical AI and rights respecting AI. The list could go on. But I think maybe it's a good place to start, because these are words that could mean lots of different things, that we're now attaching, programs that are called responsible, and there's trustworthy models. And so I think the first question I'd like to ask to Colleen is to just give us your understanding of these words. Responsible AI, trustworthy AI. What does it mean to you? What do you think it should represent?
All right, thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone, for being here late in the day. And I'm Colleen Lyons, and I am with the FDA in the US, but I also worked at Boeing. I worked at veteran healthcare centers as well. So I bring those experiences and my academic work to my comments. And the first one is, this is such a great question, Phil, because I am not keen on these labels of trustworthy AI or responsible AI or ethical AI. But before I go into the reasons why, I need to give a little bit of context. The first is, the purpose of AI is to advance corporations or business by adding value to both shareholders but also stakeholders. This is a departure from Milton Friedman's long-standing and long-held view that the purpose of a corporation is to make profit, and that is no longer true. The second reason is, and our previous speaker spoke about it, is the fact that from a business and geopolitical environment, we are in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. It's called VUCA. And you just heard about it if you were with the previous speaker. And the term started at the US Army War College after the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall fell. Why? Military doctrine at that point with the US and allies was that previously there was one enemy. It was the Soviet Union. After the Cold War ended, now there were lots of fronts to fight. So the term VUCA was invoked because of the significant change necessary for military doctrine. VUCA has now become pretty, not standard, but very visible in business, leadership, and change management literature. Why? The environment we are in is volatile. The speed of change is breathtaking. It's uncertain. We can't really tell what is going on right now. The complexity is staggering in terms of the number of decision makers that are involved in any given item, as well as the number of decisions that need to be made. And the uncertainty is that you really can't get a grasp on what's going on in the moment. So I propose that generative AI is really VUCA 2.0. So it's for those two reasons that I'm not real keen on these labels. And I'm going to specifically talk about the elements of aspects of responsible AI, trustworthy AI, and ethical AI. So responsible AI requires ethical, fair, accountable, safe, secure, sustainable products and implementations. Fair. Trustworthy AI has mostly the same, but has added privacy and data protection. They throw in their ethical considerations and transparency. These are really wonderful aspirations. Now we get into AI ethics and all the things that I just said, and you layer on top of that this notion of moral principles and practices, maximize social benefit, reduce risk, address bias, explainability, human impact, human rights. The bramble, the thorns, whose moral values? China? Canada? Mexico? Venezuela? Is it Fortune 25 companies? Is it OpenAI? Is it Tesla? So this is just the beginning of things we need to think about before we start using these words. Now, I don't have an issue with the attributes that I just said. In fact, I think that they're utterly and profoundly necessary. Here's what my issue is that these labels can be very glib, they can lack rigor, and are so easy to claim. Without accountability, these attributes are like Christmas ornaments. Now, picture, if you will, a gorgeous 20-foot Christmas tree in some grand living room. And a little toddler, Phil, walks in, he has an 18-month-old, walks into that room and sees this shiny, glittery tree and cannot help themselves to go climb that tree. Well, what's going to happen to the ornaments? Toddler will be fine. The ornaments are going to be smashed and broken on the ground. So I suspect that the traditional ethics and compliance programs that are going to be repurposed for AI are obsolete. They're unworkable in a VUCA world. And this is what happened at Boeing, and I can attest to it because I was there. The company could not endure a VUCA moment. So without values-driven leadership and accountability and our ability to operationalize AI values, we are playing a fool's game.
Thank you very much, Colleen. And some of the things that you mentioned in terms of values-driven leadership and really speaking about the history of some of these terms and the people who have kind of created meaning behind them have also made me realize that I forgot to begin the panel by acknowledging that the conference today is being held on unceded Indigenous lands. Just speaking of some of the origins of these terms and the histories, the Ganyangahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today is a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. So we meant to begin the panel this way today, but I think as I turn to Aaron, and I'd like to ask him from the First Nations Information Governance Center, as you're listening to some of what Colleen is saying and some of the perspectives you have at your organization and on First Nations data sovereignty, what do these words mean? Responsible, trustworthy AI, in a whether generative AI or AI context?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks.
And thanks, Colleen, for starting us off. And thanks for the land acknowledgement, too. That should be a regular feature of all events, of all times when we come together. Not only this place, this community, but for those of you, and I guess I want to maybe situate us a little bit, and situate where I work at the First Nations Information Governance Center. In my comments about responsibility, I think of the terms we're looking at here: ethics, trust, responsibility. Responsibility is the one that kind of leaps out to me as the one with the most consequences. When I first thought about trustworthy AI, generative AI, was, is this is this a generative AI that might make mistakes or tell us something that's untrue or quote unquote hallucinate? And I think that's an important issue, but I don't think it's I don't think it gets to the heart of things, maybe like responsibility does. So this is the World Summit on AI. There are a couple of them. There's one in Amsterdam, I know, and we're here in the Americas, I guess, and many of us here use the term Turtle Island. This is Anishinaabe. It's a translation from Anishinaabe, Anishinaabemowin, and other indigenous languages of what's now eastern and central Canada. To the south, what's called South America is sometimes referred to as Abya Yala. It's a Colombian and Panamanian indigenous language that's been adopted by, that term's been adopted by other indigenous groups in South America, meaning fertile land. So for those of us who live here in Turtle Island, nice to be with you, and those of you who have traveled from away, welcome. I work at the First Nations Information Governance Center. That is not a government. It is an advisory and technical research body that serves First Nations in data sovereignty. And my work is in what we call critical inquiry and collective inquiry around the social, technical, and cultural elements of data sovereignty. So responsibility, I think it's so much of it is about place and context, and it brings to mind something that Joelle Pinot said this morning in her comments when she was talking about her work at Meta, that we what did she say? We build on the discoveries of those who came before us. And of course, it's not just an abstraction of the people who came before us. People who are here, Indigenous peoples here in Turtle Island, are still very much with us. I am one of them, and I think there may be some Indigenous folks here at the event today other than myself. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that this World Summit of the Americas is taking place in a specific political and cultural context. So all that to say, I think it's very hard to talk about a responsible generative AI when it can come from a place of latent violence. And I was questioning earlier if I was going to use that word violence, and I'm going to stick with it. And I think what I mean here is the violence that's latent, that's inside a lot of datafication processes, which are essentially about removing information from a context, subdividing it into transferable components, data points that can be recomposed in other places. And there's a double-edged sword here. There's a double violence of often that takes place without consent, and it's often used to add value to or inform processes that people aren't consenting to. So what could a responsible generative AI look like? Well, I'm thinking about principles of reciprocity, respect, and relationality baked into the very design of a generative AI, as opposed to what I'm observing through my work at FNIGC, and I'm not speaking for all Indigenous people at all, I'm observing this from my work, my privileged position at FNIGC, a tendency to extract and abstract and reify information for its own sake. And at the risk of some sort of pan-Indigenous approach, which I absolutely hate and I think wouldn't be appropriate, there is a common thread in Indigenous cultures in Turtle Island and elsewhere, that relationships and context are important. And that doesn't mean that information can't travel, and it doesn't mean that there can't be innovation. It means that relationships, past and future, need to be respected. So can a generative AI be developed with those principles? I'm going to tell you that I don't know, but I think that would be the challenge and the question that I would put to the technologists and the data scientists in the room. So that's my take on responsible AI, generative AI.
Thank you, Aaron. And just listening to you speak, I mean, I just start to think of some of the initiatives that are being that are taking place at enterprises, other organizations who are trying to come up with some of these solutions to maybe humanize or restore restore the human quality, or make the datafication process more humane. And if we're talking about consent and privacy, or we talked with Yannick about, we were discussing the panel about new advances in whether it's federated learning or privacy preserving technologies, reciprocity and copyright. And it seems that we are struggling on the margins.
And questions of scale, I think, are so important.
Questions of scale are very important.
Yeah.
And the the curation of, or generation of data sets that could help fill certain gaps. Yeah, I think thanks very much for sharing. There's a lot of commonalities with a lot of other approaches, and I think it's something that we should be mindful of. There's a bridging of the conversations we need to have. Pam, I know in your work as the Chief Data and Trust Officer at TELUS, in my view, you guys have been working on issues related to responsible AI and data ethics for a long time, as far as large enterprises go, as a leader. So I'd love to hear from you what this has come to mean, these two words at TELUS, and how this has also impacted some of your initiatives, including external consultation. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Phil. We have been focused on the broader concept of data ethics, and then now, and also specifically responsible AI, and they really are converging, especially when we're looking at the volume of data involved in something like Gen AI. And it's been a number of years, but then there's been a little bit of a shift in focus recently, and I appreciated Colleen's comments about, if we don't have that tone from the top, if we're not actually operationalizing these values and having value-driven leadership, as you put it, then we are just virtue signaling. They are empty terms, and we will be unsuccessful. And so I think, we talk a lot at TELUS that we are practicing responsible AI. We're not saying this is responsible AI, this is what it looks like, this is the definition, this is your end product. It is a constant journey to try to iterate and understand how these values apply in a rapidly changing technology. And so trying to kind of be right alongside the developers, the data scientists throughout that process to continue to apply those values, because it's not going to be a single process or tool that we can just implement once and say that we're done and call it responsible. And just in terms of Aaron's comments, like when I look at, what does it look like in the context of the Indigenous perspective, and this has been something that's been important to us for a while, is to try to figure out how do we participate in that, in the act of reconciliation, and what are the actions that we can take to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into our data program, and more specifically now into our Gen AI program. And what I can say is it's not simple at all, and Aaron kind of described some of the complexities. And it's not okay, I'm going to buy a book, figure out what these perspectives are, and put them into my responsible AI document, my statement of principles, and call it a day. Instead, it is really a journey, and one that we've been working on with, first through learning. We've had our whole team and a number of other folks across TELUS taking the OCAP training that the FNIGC offers. And then there's, we do a lot of listening, and that's hard. For a group that is really focused on trying to do all the time, implement, get ahead, move quickly, be agile, it's hard to stop and just listen and say, let's just think about this differently, and let's allow ourselves the time to appreciate the complexities and the nuances. So we work really closely with our Indigenous Advisory Committee, which pre-existed Gen AI, but I was lucky enough to have that already existing committee at TELUS that we can draw on. And then we've been leading some initiatives to just, again, pause. Let's not try to incorporate anything until we understand a little bit more. So some initiatives to go and do more listening externally, partnerships with Indigenous groups. We've been setting up listening tours across various, listening workshops across various areas of Canada with different Indigenous groups to try to understand perspectives on data and on Gen AI. Like with any group, not consistent, right? There's no single Indigenous perspective about how Gen AI should be incorporating the Indigenous history or experience. So it's challenging like everything else with Gen AI. We spent the last year more broadly doing a report on the perspectives of Indigenous groups as well as racialized groups, older Canadians, new Canadians, youth, LGBTQ, 2S+. We've been doing, persons with physical disabilities. We did a whole workshop series. We went to various groups and published a report at the beginning of this year, which is really just the beginning of trying to hear from the perspectives of all of the different groups within Canada. And this is just scratching the surface to understand how, what their perspectives are, what their insights are, what their fears are, so that can start to shape some of those values that we bring to how we build this. And I don't think it's even defined, how they will be incorporated yet, because I don't think we can do that until we understand the nature of those perspectives. But that's a publicly available report, and I really hope that other organizations will kind of hear those perspectives and realize how important it is to get out there and start to talk about how the AI that they are deploying will be impacting people, being a little bit more transparent and helping to educate and create resources to educate Canadians about AI, because that's what we really need.
So what I'm getting so far from Colleen's opening remarks really focused on some of the origins of the values and how we're defining these terms comes back to the people who are involved in these discussions and the values, and Aaron speaking specifically about relationships. I think, Pam, you've really just exemplified to us how this is the relationship building process around how an enterprise thinks about AI internally is like a lot of other relationships, not very linear, and it's time intensive, and but it's also, I guess, part of the process is very important in this. Yannick, I would like to ask you. You're the Chief AI Officer of Scotiabank, so you're someone on the panel who's actually building machine learning models, and his team is building them as well. When speaking of generative AI, there's a lot of discussion in the last 6 months, especially maybe a year or more, about some of the major releases that we're seeing from some of the major companies that are developing closed models like OpenAI and Anthropic and Cohere, and some of the open source alternatives from companies that are scaling quite quickly like Mistral, but other smaller projects too. So I'm curious, in your team, when you're thinking about responsible generative AI or trustworthy AI, you're making decisions about risk, and you're evaluating candidate models for a project, what are some of the considerations that you look at when you're making these types of choices?
So there's mainly 3 dimensions, but first, when we talk about open source or closed source models, open source models are not completely open source. The only thing we have is the weights, but we don't typically have the training data itself. We are not sure what training data exactly was used to train any model, including any open source model. So we don't know really whose perspectives were reflected, whose perspectives may not be reflected in the models. But aside from that, the 3 dimensions are, first one around privacy. If you use a closed source model, you will use the APIs from OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. Essentially, you will be sharing some data with them. It can be different levels. You will have MSAs with them that spell out what they can do or not do with your data, but you still need to trust them to some extent. If you use an open source model, you can run it in your own environment, your own walled garden, and you don't need to share data with anyone. So that's one significant question that you have to ask yourself first. The second is around the cost. Closed source typically costs about 3 times more when you process by the token than an open source model. However, closed source is easier to access. You really just have to call an existing API. It's not complicated. Once you want to go open source, you can do it. We do it. But you need the skills to set up those models, to find the right space in the cloud, to operate them, and so on. So it's more difficult. It's cheaper by the token, but more difficult to set up. And the third thing you would want to look at is, do you need the latest and greatest models? For now, it's still the closed source models, right? Gemini 1.5, GPT-4, they don't have open source equivalent yet in terms of how good they are, what are their performance metrics. But again, there's a caveat there too, right? Maybe you don't need the latest and greatest. Maybe you need maybe a small model is enough to do what you want to do. So you need to, then again, there's a fork in the road. Do you want to spend the time to find what is the minimum model that is going to do the job for you? Or do you just want to take the best model available to you, closed or open source, and just do this one? It will cost you a bit more, but you will save some time finding which is the minimum model for you. So there's no simple answer, lots of ins, lots of outs.
Sure, and obviously, I mean, if we listening to your answer, the cost is there's such a different cost. So you're weighing lots of different trade-offs. And another point that you made that resonated with me, and I'd love to hear some of the other perspectives from the panelists. But when you don't know, we don't have the training data, and you don't know. Let's just to stick with the theme of what we're discussing. Some of the values that have been imputed to the model. That I'm curious to know a little bit more about some of the ways that you control for that and can, maybe test the application you're building to help, to have the assurance that the outputs are kind of respecting kind of the performance criteria, but also some of the risks that you're concerned with. But it reminded me a little bit of what Aaron was saying about some of the dislocation, right? Of when we have a component part, but we don't have the origins, right? We don't have So it's an interesting problem. So tell us, what does that mean for you when you're? So
there's a question of risk appetite. We are a bank, so our job is to manage risk, not to avoid it, but to manage it. And one of the big decisions we made is that for now, in the current state of Gen AI, we will release applications that are employee-facing only, not customer-facing, because the risk is too high, again, for our risk appetite. And because the applications are employee-facing, our employees are not going to try to abuse the application, to try to make it do something we wouldn't want it to do. That's one point. And the second point is the domain we are interested in is always about finance, highly technical. So the complicated questions around bias and source of knowledge and all of that don't come up too much for that type of application.
Thank you. Anybody else wanted to just respond to either Yannick or any other topic that has come up so far? Otherwise, I'm watching the clock, and it's amazing. We're already getting down to the last 4 minutes here.
I hope this isn't hijacking things, but something that Irina Risch said earlier, and I'm probably betraying my newness to the field of AI, but the conceptual step from deep learning through the increasing size of the models to the search for the development of the foundational model, that to me sort of stuck out as really symptomatic of the big set of contradictions here, and it really challenges, I think, what I think we need to hold on to from an indigenous data sovereignty perspective of reciprocity and relationality. But if the technology, if the cutting edge technologists and scientists are saying the only way this will work is to aggregate everything, because that's the best way. Then we'll start to seek sort of elements of justice or equity or something after we've done the foundational model. I guess this is more of a comment. It's like, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but does anyone else sort of find that problematic or?
100%. I'm acutely aware of the fact that we are taking all of these values and operationalizing a program that's sitting on top of a model over which we have no control. So where it came from, we can't really comment on that right now, and actually, this is a subject of litigation, in fact. We are kind of just in the place where this is what we can control. This is the tool that's sitting there. This is what we can control, so we will control what we do from here on in. But there is this underlying piece that we are kind of required to just accept if we're going to be, using Gen AI. But I think continue to challenge separately. Like I think the reality is we're operationalizing. And I don't like the idea of divorcing these two things, but we are operationalizing Gen AI, and we are using these tools over which we did not develop. But I think there's still room to have separate discussions about exactly as you've raised it, like about the origins of those and about the appropriateness of that and what the implications are, and whether any of them can be addressed after the fact through how we use those tools. But I think it's really interesting that what, for us changed the most when we hit the Gen AI era in our responsible AI program is that suddenly we were dealing with everyone in the organization having access to this extraordinarily powerful tool, as opposed to my team just working with the data scientists and the data analytics team. So many of the issues are very similar to what we're dealing with before Gen AI, but we are now dealing with them across tens of thousands of people. And so that's a massive culture shift. And it means that we have way more perspectives from our team members about what's right and what's wrong. For me, just an incredibly heartening amount of questioning from our team members about, is this responsible? How do we know it's safe? How do we know this is the right thing to do? How do we know what the impacts are? And I think we're having a pretty good moment in the world right now where people are seized of this at the general public level, where privacy has suddenly become a topic that people care deeply about years after many people said privacy was dead. Naming no names. So, I think it's a really interesting moment where we have an opportunity to educate people about what we're doing with the data, with the technology now, but also I think we'll have, maybe when we can catch our breath, we can talk about some of those more profound issues about the underlying implications of the technology itself. But I think, from a commercial perspective, we're moving ahead, and there is a sense of urgency and a need to move quickly in a competitive world, that this is meaningful technology that you want to take advantage of. But there are these underlying tensions that we do have to kind of think about and try to build in as we go, and try to do that lockstep with how we roll this out to the organization, the guardrails that we put in, the data literacy, the data ethics literacy that we're rolling out to the whole organization, and which, as I said, I'm really heartened by what a thirst we're finding there is for that. They are hungry for more information, and we found that too when we published our AI report. We'd done the research that I referred to earlier about inclusivity and people's perspectives. I was shocked at how much interest there was in the media in that people know this matters, and it matters differently to different groups, and it's going to differently impact different groups in ways that we don't want it to if we're not careful. And so I think it's really great that we're having this kind of broader social discussion right now, and we have to keep it going. But then I think there's an even deeper one. When we've mastered this one, which is less challenging, there's that deeper one that I think that discussion we have to have.
Can I jump in here and just kind of Bill, these are wonderful points, and what comes to mind is, first, humility. I think humility is a basis of everything, what I've heard here, but it's really the basis of us being successful in optimizing the incredible opportunities of generative AI and everything wrapped around that. The second thing is this moment in time. This is a legacy moment. Now, we're all sitting in this room, and I was talking to one of the organizers of AI Summit, who, I guess the last one in Montreal, was 2 years ago, 2019. And I think that the size of the crowd has probably tripled, if not more. And we're birthing. I mean, people have been doing this for a long time, but people like me, I feel like I'm at a birth, and this is our legacy moment. So the temptation to have finances drive what it is that we do, OpenAI is such a fantastic case study in that. But this is a legacy moment, and I implore all of us to think about our participation in this as part of our legacy, as opposed to, isn't this cool technology?
Well, thank you very much to each of the panelists and for everyone for sticking around. We've gone a little bit over time, so I won't be able to go to Yannick or to Aaron for final comments. But I think this is a big topic, and I think we did an interesting job of covering from the values all the way down to some of the technical choices and the commercial realities, and how some of the ways that we're trying to hopefully preserve relationships while moving ahead with artificial intelligence and generative AI. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very wide-ranging discussion. Thank you to all our panelists. Sorry, I've renamed it my menacing walk towards the stage. So if you're speaking tomorrow and you saw me very surreptitiously creeping towards the stage, it means that probably over time.